All right, it's 5:30 and we're going to start the regular meeting of the Public Works and Highway Committee. Attendance shows that all members of the committee are present. I'll entertain approval of the minutes for August 14th.
I move approval of the minutes of August 14th, 2024.
Second.
Any comments or changes on the minutes? We'll vote. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. Who do we have? Who's taking notes tonight?
It'll be me and we'll use the recording for the minutes.
Okay, I just noticed that we didn't have anybody else on the dais. Okay. Moving on to public comment. Anybody here who would like to speak for 3 minutes, please come up to the microphone, turn it on, and state your name and address. You filled out a form, I presume. Okay, we'll come up, state your name and address, but do fill out a form before you go. They're by the door. It has to be, the red light has to be off.
Oh, here we go. Okay. I haven't seen everybody for a long time, but Steve Wazalowski, and I'm at West 169, North 10427 Pheasant Run in the Old Farm subdivision. And again, I'm a member of our our utility advisory committee. Our last meeting I thought was very good. And the Ruckert and Milky gentleman here is going to give you did a real good presentation on what we need to do to work on our infrastructure there. And I guess I'm not sure of all the steps and how things go. I was asking a lot of questions, and I know this comes before you tonight, so I'm sure something gets forwarded onto the board. And I'm not sure what we're looking to approve or not approve at this time, but I know one thing we mentioned at the meeting last time, it was not in the Ruckert and Milky presentation. There was an option. We always were talking about lift station number 6 on County Line Road, that someday that may have to get rebuilt. And I know at one point in time, we were looking at buying a parcel of land there on County Line Road. And I kind of over time was saying, I think there's other options. And in fact, Milkert and Rookie had one of their options was from lift station 6 by Walmart. We could put in a forced main up Maple and tie into Lilac, and we would completely bypass lift station number 6, and we would not increase its capacity whatsoever. And in fact, lift station 6 is pretty much built with all the construction in that area. It's pretty much a built up area. Lift station 6 probably wouldn't see much more added load. Lift station 3 is the one that's going to see the added load as development occurs further west or up Appleton Avenue. So that sewage could all be directed through a forced main up Maple Road. And in that original report by Milkert and Rookie, there was a cost of about $2.3 million to put in a bore in a directional forced main for that part of the project. Now, I know they talk about, in that study, we're talking about, well, if we were to do something with lift station 6 and had to increase the size of it because we would keep the flow coming that way, we'd have to buy more land. And they were saying, well, maybe that's $1 million to buy the land. A new lift station might be $1 million, $1.5 million to build. In addition to that, lift station 3 on Main by Walmart would need an additional parallel forced main to get down to lift station 6, and that would be maybe $1 million there. Then you add the additional costs. Lift station 6 right now pumps sewage underneath Highway 41 up to Division Road. That forced main's undersized. That would have to be another parallel forced main there. So you might be looking at $4.5 million. Then I know Kevin, our engineer, talked about something that they're looking at ways to eliminate lift station 3. We could probably gravity feed out to lift station 6. Was that right, Kevin? Or am I making something up? I don't want. That's correct. Okay, I just want to make sure I'm correct on it. So in order to do that, you're talking about putting in underground piping from lift station 6 down Appleton. You're ripping up the road. You're ripping up everything. And you're going down maybe 20, 25 feet. and you think of all the infrastructure that's in there. I can tell you what the electric company's got in that road with our conduit packages coming from Germantown Power Substation. I put a lot of that stuff in back in the early 90s. So once you hit County Line Road, it's all electric cable and conduit packages. You got phone company, you got gas utilities. I mean, to do that, that's even a more additional cost. So all I wanted to say tonight was that if it's not going to be discussed by the gentleman here from Rupert and Milky, I think this forced main from lift station 3 up Maple is still an option that needs to be explored. They can certainly explore and firm up some additional numbers for us on that. So I wanted to point that out if that's not in there. It's going to be brought up tonight. I don't want that forgotten. It's important because you're looking at a big savings, and I know even if that's all I wanted to say there. The other thing I wanted to make Kevin and Matt aware of, I'm not sure if they're familiar with, everything we know goes to Old Farm, and the sulfur, the hydrogen sulfide smell has been pretty bad this summer again. Over the years, we get a lot of rotten egg smells at that lift station. And Tim's aware of it. He's got some kind of system in place. I think that helps to take care of that smell or whatever. And it's done a much better job over the years. But in the hot weather this summer, again, we've had a lot of smell at Old Farm, which again, hydrogen sulfide is a dangerous gas. It's a poisonous gas. It likes to eat concrete. That's why over the years, you guys have approved relining the 48-inch sewer. It's eating right through that concrete to the steel rebars. So I don't know how you control that. There must be something that you can do to manage that better, because I know Old Farm sees all that sewage at the end, and it's a big issue at that location. And just one last thing, I know we're going to eventually have to build a smaller lift station for our development up at Holy Hill Road. Once you start moving sewage from Richfield to our system, and it's got to travel all the way eventually to Old Farm, that sewage is sitting in the pipe for a long, long time. It's starting to lose a lot of its oxygen. It starts to warm up, ferment, and that all leads to the sulfur, hydrogen sulfide gases, and starts eating things up more. So something that nobody's ever thought about or addressed yet, maybe if we need to build, when we build that station, Richfield should pay for some kind of system to take care of the sulfur, hydrogen sulfur acid issue. You can inject stuff into the system. So I just want to make that point tonight. And I guess that's it, but okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else would like to come up? And Steve, don't forget to fill out your form.
Sarah Larson, Butternut Road. As you hear the presentation tonight for Division Road, I would like you to keep in mind about the Old Farm lift station that is going to need the $5 million approximately for the replacement cost. And given that that was not readily visible during the listening sessions, I ask that you take a very conservative financial approach as to what your recommendation is going to be coming forward to the full board as to what happens with Division Road. I think taxpayers will be very surprised, and you factor this in combination with all the other endeavors that this board is taking on. I think the taxpayers do not want that kind of burden. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else? Seeing that there are not, we will move on. And we will begin with unfinished business. Approval of the Public Works Engineering Division Development Handbook. Update.
So the development handbook, as was mentioned in the packet, was last updated in 2020. We went through several rounds of staff revisions and review over the last 6 or 7 months. And last Public Works Committee meeting brought it forward as a discussion item just to get it in front of everybody. And are now looking for approval of the update to our development handbook.
Okay, committee comments, motion?
Move approval of the of the development handbook.
Second.
Any comments on it? Bob?
Just a couple of questions here, Matt. Maybe you've already answered these. This is coming from the change log.
Mhm.
Mentioned that as far as water main check dams, you needed to confirm the spec from Cedar. Do you know, has that been done?
Hey, Kevin?
I believe
Kevin will
Cedar's
come
a
up and-
Cedar's a contractor.
Yeah.
Good evening. Um, um, Trustee Warren, in response to your question on item 2.III.2.C, we removed and replaced the reference to figure 20 with words to install a check dam with bentonite chips 2 feet thick across the full width of the trench and 4 feet above the pipe crown. The following sentence, water mains with check dams on long lengths, check with Cedar about creating a spec, that could be stricken. That second sentence could be stricken.
Okay. So you're comfortable with the spec, you don't have to check with Cedar.
Correct.
Okay. The other item was 2IX, it's an LFII. Matt's comment was not sure what needs to be done here. Just questioning, was this figured out? So it's 2IX, IFII. I feel like I'm at the eye doctor. Is that what X?
Yes, I hear your comment. I'm looking it up. Oh, thank you for your patience. I'm still trying to find that.
I gave you the wrong numbers.
Yeah, and
That
part of this is that these revisions took place over a pretty long period of time, so you need to see this.
This is
So the point you made, Bob, about the 2IX1F was the old numbering convention. And
No,
the-
it's just Matt had a comment, not sure what needs to be done here. I just was trying to clean up a loose end. It's in the change log is where that comment was.
Yeah, but it's not different.
Oh, is it?
No, it's GIX1F double I,
Double odd.
page 113. I think that's what Bob is referring to. Yep,
Page 113.
Yep, I see page 113 and I'm trying to go back to the original or the 2020 development handbook to look up 2IX1F.
You can just go to the change log and track it down. You don't have to do that now. Just wanted to fill in the loose ends here. The last comment I had was we're using as-built and record drawing interchangeably. Record drawing by convent is what we should be using. And I saw in a couple places that we said as-built record drawing. That's not how I understand the nomenclature. We should just be calling it record drawing. That's what the attorneys tell me.
No, that's accurate, and I think there was an effort to make some of those changes in the document, but I don't remember specifically with this section.
Yeah, there was the first round of revisions and we anticipate having regular review of the document and returning this document back to Public Works Highways Committee for review and regular updates. I concur with respect to the difference between as-built and record drawings, where the as-built are surveyed, updated, compared to a record drawing being the document of record that's available.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, just one thing. Do we not want to mandate that everything be submitted electronically? We use the word may electronically. Don't we want everything electronically just for storage and records for the future?
Staff scans in documents to make them electronic if they're not provided. Sometimes there are documents that are delivered in hard copy. The preference is to have electronic versions, and most businesses and developers provide electronic drawings.
So why wouldn't we want to mandate that and put that cost and burden on the people that want to develop instead of our staff scanning in their documents?
Yeah, that can be done.
Just, that's the only thing that struck me.
Is that a hardship for anyone?
I have not received complaints about delivering hard copies or delivering electronic versions of copies. Very often, the electronic communication, transmitting a PDF or an AutoCAD DWG file can be done via email. Sometimes having a full-size plan that's delivered is nice for review, similar to the situation where we had earlier today with the Groundwater Technical Review Committee. There was a plan set delivered by 11 by 17, and we all shared a magnifying glass to be able to read the
Ah,
font
magnifying.
size. So having a full-size plan is beneficial at times, especially for construction purposes.
I would just leave it personally. And yeah, and not only that, but you know what you want to see, and you know, as the experts on this, that you know how you prefer to get things. So I would just leave it alone. Anyway,
and I-
sorry, who else?
I would just reiterate that this is a first revision after a number of years. So we've made some good updates here, and there's probably additional updates, though fewer, if we kind of take routine stabs at updates and do this, closer to an annual basis instead of waiting 4 or 5 years. And that allows us to make, some of the additional cleanup that might be necessary.
I think I asked this before, as we go through a year, do you keep track of, like, there's reoccurring issues related to our specs so that we can incorporate any modifications into the revision?
Yes. We keep a hard copy and manually add notes to it, and then writing it in the hard copy, putting in a Post-it note or a paper clip on that particular page, in addition to any kind of emails that we receive regarding that.
Perfect.
Is our tracking method.
Any additional comments or suggestions? Nothing, Phil? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. Moving on to Rupert and Milky Sewer Facilities Plan Review and Discussion.
So we had Rupert and Milky conduct a sewer facilities plan update. This is the original plan, dates back to 1983. And for a number of reasons that Mike will talk about, we find ourselves needing a new facilities plan. The hope is that we'll have this presentation tonight and then move on to approving the plan and forwarding it to the village board for ultimate approval. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, thank you for having me here tonight. My name is Mike Blazejowski. I'm a project manager with the firm Rupert and Milky. This is a similar presentation that I gave to the Utility Advisory Committee a few weeks ago. There's a lot of information in a brief amount of time for sake of efficiency. So I'll try to get through it and be thorough yet efficient, and then we can field as many questions as you have at the end. So the objectives for this plan It 100% relates to the sanitary sewer facilities and infrastructure within the village. The main driving force behind this report was to satisfy requirements from Sewer Pack, Milwaukee Metro Sewerage District, and the DNR with respect to expanding the existing sanitary service area into Richfield and also into several areas in Germantown. Those areas, especially within Germantown, are areas that are predicted to require sanitary service to, for development within the next 20 or so years. We use the Village of Germantown's 2050 comprehensive plan as a guidance for that development and how that's going to all play out. The other goal was to provide analysis of the development within Germantown and Richfield as to what type of development, how soon, and where it may be, basically where the development is going to happen initially and then longer down the road. Ultimately, once the report was put together, another main objective was to identify needs in the infrastructure, needs in your sanitary sewer system to support that development as it plays out for the next 20 years. So I talked about expanding the sanitary sewer service area. Sewer Pack refers to these as amendments. So if you look at the screen, your existing sanitary sewer service area is the area that's shaded in blue currently. So that's not necessarily all developed area, but it's an area that is within an allowable sanitary service area by Sewer Pack's recommendation. There's a small trapezoid of purple area you'll see north of Freistadt Road. That was, we were told by the village that that would be eliminated from the sewer service area. And then the yellow areas with the black dashed border, those are areas that will be amended into the sanitary service area within the next probably few years, depending on how the village proceeds with that. Up in the red dashed area up on the upper left corner, that's the immediate amendment for the area of Richfield to be included in the service area. And then you'll see the inset on the left there, the incremental planning area. So for analysis purposes, we were directed by all the entities involved to include the entire section of Richfield within the analysis in the event that the initial amended sewer service area into Richfield would be expanded further. That'll be easier in the future if that does happen because we've already included it within the calculations in the facilities plan. So the first step was to determine what types of development are going to be within the largely undeveloped areas of Germantown. So the colorful map you see here is a kind of a simplified version of a zoning map. So we have land use categories of single and multifamily residential. We have commercial, institutional, industrial, and then the greens are recreational and wetlands. And then the light purple is right away. So we started with the village's existing land use map and then used the 2050 comprehensive plan as a guidance in order to determine what the undeveloped parcels would potentially become developed in the future. So it was an iterative process. We worked with your planner quite a bit to identify, any plans we didn't know about and make sure that the map was as accurate as it could be. We also did a similar map for the portion of Richfield that's included within. What we did throughout the report was try to keep Richfield kind of compartmentalized by itself as opposed to the village. So we didn't want to, this map, you don't see the Richfield land use on there because we wanted to keep those things separate so that the village would have an accurate picture of what your own development will produce as far as wastewater needs, as opposed to Richfield included in. So once we figured out the land use, we identified basically service basins for the sanitary sewer area. So this next map, this doesn't necessarily relate to MMSD sewer sheds or village sewer sheds. What this is we identified within the sanitary sewer system between pump stations and gravity flow where those developed areas flow. And then by doing this, we're able to calculate the anticipated wastewater generation with each one of those areas. And then we can add and subtract within the analysis based on what portion of the system we're analyzing at any given kind of snapshot within the report. So these were divided up based on what pump station they may contribute to, or if they contribute to one or more gravity interceptors. It makes it a very easy way to add and subtract for different portions in the system we're analyzing. So the table on the right is basically a summary of our flow calculations for all those basin areas. So we have our total basin acres, and the names on under the basin name column, those are the names of those colored shaded areas on the last slide, the incremental basins for analysis. And they were named a nomenclature based on their location or the pump station that they contribute to. So then we have a net flow generation area. So flow calculations are typically based on acreage, and then there are flow factors used within the acreage based on the land type use to calculate a generated flow. The net flow generation is the area in acreage of that basin. What we subtract out wetlands, we subtract out recreational land uses, and we subtract out right of way, because those three land uses will never contribute to any sanitary sewer flow. It's important also to note that in those undeveloped areas, we don't assume that 100% of a largely undeveloped area will generate flow. So we reduce the overall area by 30% to get our net flow generation. So in areas that are largely built out, it's pretty easy to determine the acreages of each land type. In the undeveloped areas, we really don't know how it's going to play out. So we use this 30% reduction to make a more accurate estimate of how much of the land will actually generate wastewater flow for analysis. We have peaking factors that we also have to apply to those flow generation calculations. So we calculate a base flow based on a certain amount of gallons per day per acre. And then we have to apply a peaking factor to account for inflow and infiltration, diurnal usage peaking. In order to account for, ultimately, we want to size the system for a peak hour flow. So this is the maximum flow rate that hits the sanitary system in a peak hour flow for a rain event. Many of the peaking factors were derived from a prior lift station study that Ruckert-Melke did on all of your existing pumping stations. We have measured flow data there from the SCADA system, where we can look at rain events and figure out what the average base flow is, and then what the peak flow during that peak hour is during a major rain event. Luckily, there was a 5.5-inch rain event within that study period. So we were able to use that for these peaking factors, which gave us a real good indicator of kind of the worst case scenario that you're going to have to deal with. In areas that aren't really developed, where we don't have measurable flow, we had to make some estimations for the peaking factor, and those are derived from Wisconsin Administrative Code, typically anywhere between 2.5 and 5 for a community of your size. We went on the lower end of that, the 2.5, to be a little, I should say, less conservative and not overly conservative. So we're not telling you that you have tons of infrastructure improvements and you're spending lots of money for a peaking factor that may not be accurate. The reasoning behind that is that when you have a largely undeveloped basin and you develop it, you're getting brand new infrastructure. It's being inspected. It's being put in by the latest specifications. So it should, in essence, not be as subject to inflow and infiltration factors. And then in the last two columns, we have our theoretical developed peak hour flow, both in gallons per minute and cubic feet per second. The reason we have, there's just basically a simple math conversion between the two. They're the same number, just converted. The reason we do that is pump stations are typically analyzed in gallons per minute for pump sizing and capacity, and pipe flow in gravity sewers is typically analyzed in cubic feet per second capacity. So to keep those things consistent with engineering standards, we calculated both and showed both. On this map, we picked out critical points within the system where we wanted to analyze. So if you go back to the map with the shaded basins, at each of these points, we wanted to take a snapshot of the quantity of theoretical flow in that peak hour event. And keep in mind that that peak hour event that we're calculating is assuming that the entire sanitary sewer service area is completely developed in 20 years. So every last vacant parcel of land within that amended area would be developed out. So these points were picked at critical junctures in interceptors, where two interceptors come together, where multiple pipes come together into a lift station, and ultimately it gives us that snapshot just upstream of a given point, where we can analyze the capacity versus the flow that's coming into that point. So this is the result of the gravity sanitary sewer analysis. So at each of those points, we use the village's information they provided through GIS and as-built plans the pipe type and the slope and other information were all used, the diameter, to basically calculate a theoretical capacity of that pipe as it stands in the ground. Then we can take our theoretical flow, compare it to the capacity, and then we know if we're over capacity or under. Now, when we talk about capacity in gravity sewer, typically 2/3 flow in a pipe is considered full. And the reason for that is if you get to that point, you don't want sanitary sewer pipes flowing full. There's a number of engineering problems that and serviceability problems that come with that. So the 2/3 threshold is typically that need to look at some alternatives. So we've got our theoretical flow rates in CFS here for the gravity comparison. The second column is the estimated capacity. So that's like I talked about, we plug those parameters into an equation that calculates the capacity of that pipe in its current condition. The third column is where we kind of compartmentally added the flow from Richfield. Again, so we could kind of take that in and out as we needed so that the village had a clear picture. And then we have the total theoretical flow rate in the fourth column, and that includes Richfield as a total. The good news with this chart is you look at the column that has estimated remaining capacity and you don't see any negative numbers, which means there are no gravity pipes in the system that we determined to be short on capacity in that 20-year design, fully developed condition. The last column there is really the most important. That's your percent remaining to full capacity. So there are a couple pipes that are down near that 20% range, but that's still in that fully developed condition 20 years down the road, and there's still a little bit of capacity remaining. So as far as we have determined in this facilities plan, the gravity system appears to be adequate to support all that development in that 20-year time frame. Pump station capacities were then also analyzed. We're back to the gallons per minute calculation now. Basically a similar chart to the last one where we have the theoretical flow rate from the Germantown fully expanded sewer service area, existing maximum capacity of the pump stations. Those numbers were pulled from our prior lift station study that we completed for the village. And then we added in the Richfield portion of the flow to get our total theoretical flow rate. And this is kind of where the alarm bells started to go off. As you can see, there's some negative numbers there. And if you look at the percent capacity utilized, we have identified 3 stations that are well over their existing maximum capacity at that 20-year full build out time period. Also important to note, pump station 7 and Main Street are both above the 80% threshold. So similar to gravity pipes being 2/3 full, 80% is typically the engineering standard for looking at alternatives, and it's kind of an action threshold for upgrading or looking at alternatives to relieve the pump station. So you can see Old Farm is obviously the most concerning. Main Street also will take a bulk of the flow for the development up in Richfield and in that gateway area. Pump stations 3 and 6 also could be well under capacity if that area were to develop out. It'll kind of, I've been asked the question a few times by your staff wisely, when do we need to do these things, and what's the time frame here? What's important first? Well, it really is driven by that development component. So if the southwest portion of the village is anticipated to develop and bloom faster, then lift stations 3 and 6 are on the radar screen. If it's that gateway area in Richfield, then Main Street and Old Farm are really the 2 that need to be looked at sooner. So for the 20-year design, just kind of a summary, the gravity sewers appear to be adequate. Another item of note, so the total theoretical flow we calculated was 21.28 million gallons a day. That includes Richfield, and that again is that peak hour flow. That is below what MMSD has identified as their allowable peak hour flow at the connection point with MMSD of 22.27. So it's just below, which is a good thing because we've identified that within this fully developed condition, you're still within what MMSD will allow, and they don't necessarily need infrastructure upgrades on their end to allow the village to complete their development plans. Like I said, pump station 3 and 6 are well above the capacity. Main Street's above that 80% level. So then we looked at some very high level alternatives. What can we do to alleviate the situation so that we don't hold development back in the future? For 3 and 6, and these alternatives definitely aren't the only alternatives. They're, in our recommendation, some of the more viable and maybe economic alternatives, but there definitely can be more alternatives identified in further study. So pump station 3 would require a major overhaul. There's not a lot of room to work with on the parcel of land it's on. And it would also include having to build a new 10-inch force main to discharge down to pump station 6, which would be likely in Appleton Avenue, somewhat difficult to construct, but the existing force main is not sizable enough to accommodate all the development in that southwest portion. Pump station 6 would also require major upgrades. Some good news about that, the existing 10-inch force main that goes under the interstate appears to be adequately sized to support upgrades to that lift station. Potential also does exist to eliminate pump station 3. If a project were done with those two pump stations in tandem, gravity sewer would actually work from pump station 6 back to 3, and then you could eliminate pump station 3 if it's desirable. It is a more expensive alternative, but in some communities, they have a desire to eliminate a pump station just from a general operation and maintenance standpoint. With Main Street, so we're predicting it would operate at around 86% of its maximum capacity. It's important to note that at that capacity, the velocity within the existing force main would be greater than 6 feet per second. Now, why that's important is typically 6 feet per second is the engineering threshold for issues with water hammer. So if the pump station loses power and the pumps shut off while it's pumping maximum capacity, you can have a shock wave of pressure go through the force main and literally destroy your force main. In multiple locations or single location, wherever it might be, you can have a catastrophic failure. So typically in our design of new pump stations or rehabilitating pump stations, we try to keep velocity below 6 feet per second. So in reality, we had 6,250 gallons a minute was the maximum capacity. But if you stay with that 6 feet per second threshold, you're actually limited to 4,100 gallons per minute, which puts you over 100% of the existing capacity. So some of the upgrades that we at a high level would recommend here, you rehabilitate the existing 16-inch force main with some type of cured in place lining so that that could remain in service and we could maintain that infrastructure for the future. Install a parallel 14-inch force main for those higher flow events so that we're not exceeding that 6 foot per second velocity. The bonus to having a parallel force main in these situations is also you have redundancy. So if there's an issue with one, if you need to take it out of service, you still have another one during dry weather periods that has adequate capacity to support the lift station. The majority of the existing components in the Main Street lift station could remain in service. There's other miscellaneous upgrades that we included that would be likely based on its age. The main thing for that one would be getting the force main capacity up to an adequate point to support that maximum flow. Old Farm has a similar situation. So the existing maximum capacity of the pumping station is 7,400 gallons a minute. However, again, that creates a velocity of above 6 feet per second. And it's not to say that velocity higher than 6 feet per second is okay. There are some very detailed, it's called a hydraulic transient analysis that can be performed on that pipe itself by a highly specialized firm that we've worked with before. And what they can identify is if that force main can support 7 feet per second or 7.5, whatever it might be, they can come up with a number that is a safe operating velocity. But for the purpose of the high level review, we used 6 as that threshold. So that velocity actually limits us to 6,300 gallons a minute, which again reduces that capacity even further that we're already predicting we'd be over. Similar to Main Street, we'd rehabilitate your existing force main so that that piece of infrastructure can lay in place and remain useful. Install a parallel 16-inch force main, and there'd be upgrades in this case to pumps, motors, suction piping, generator. It's definitely a more in-depth upgrade than Main Street would be. With all of these alternatives, a design study report would really be necessary to identify the exact course of action for each station. There are some assumptions that we've made without going to a very high level of effort to take measurements and look at old design plans and things of that sort for each pump station. So it's important to note that these obviously aren't the only alternatives. Some of these alternatives may need to be tweaked slightly, but at a high level, this is what we think could work. So that brings us to the cost for the improvements. So we used full reconstruction of the lift stations as basically as a comparison. So definitely don't look at the chart and think that we're recommending you replace Old Farm and you replace Main Street completely in kind. Obviously, that's always something that can be done, typically cost prohibitive. When you have something with, let's say, good bones that you can start with and upgrade. So we use that as a cost comparison so that you could see what's the difference if we do these upgrades versus just starting from scratch. We talked about the detailed analysis to kind of confirm what upgrades would exactly be necessary and complete a mini design. And the timing improvements I've mentioned before, it depends heavily on the pace of development. So if the area in Richfield and the Gateway area, if it explodes in the next 5 years, 10 years, then these upgrades are obviously more urgent. If it ends up being 40 years before it's built out, then they're less urgent. And that is all I have. So I'm open for questions.
Ready? Bob?
So as was mentioned, Mike presented in front of the Utility Advisory Committee. Same presentation, but still exciting. Thank you for all the hard work, Mike. I thought it was a very thorough report and covered all the details. Tim, like he is tonight, was at the Utility Advisory Committee. And as is pointed out in this report, the weakest links seem to be our 2 lift stations at Old Farm and on Main Street. And Tim said he's got budgeted dollars to do design study reports for those 2 lift stations in this upcoming budget. So the next steps are already in place that we're going to be looking at that. The Utility Committee unanimously approved the report, just an FYI.
Bill, Rick, any questions?
I just have one question. In the past, we had provided some services to Menominee Falls, a small portion of that. Are we completely out of Menominee Falls now?
I believe, and Tim can correct me if I'm wrong, there were some areas.
There's a
that were
small
eliminated,
amount, right?
but
Where
There is a small area, yeah. Yeah, the Grace Commons area, yep.
it was just a
We
question.
kind of made a trade. We used to have that whole area by Pick and Save and
Right.
JCPenney. That all came off. That's back on Menominee Falls. But we gained Grace Commons, 350 some residential units for assisted living.
Is that something, there wasn't anything mentioned in here about that. Is there anything that needs to be mentioned in a report like this?
No, because I
about
think that's
providing that?
covered, I think that's covered under a separate IGA. And they're pretty much at their built out capacity currently.
Okay. All right. That was my only question. Thanks.
Okay, so this was informational. I think the next item is going to be the approval. Is that correct?
Correct.
The way this is set up?
Yep.
So we'll move on to B, recommendation of the sanitary sewer system facilities plan update. This is where we need a motion to move it to village board.
I'll make a motion to approve the sanitary sewer system facilities plan.
Second?
Any more questions or comments? Hearing none, we'll vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you so much. It was really thorough.
opportunity.
Thanks, Mike.
We'll move on to item C, approval of the development agreement between the village and Truck Country.
So we have the development agreement with Truck Country on the agenda tonight. Essentially, the Truck Country development is a private development at this point. It had been somewhat dependent on Richfield Utilities and the extension going through that property. But with the developments in Richfield, the alignment of those utilities has shifted back into what will become High Point Pass. So that is not part of the agreement anymore. and they're not contributing any public utilities. So this is basically a private development. There are a few things that I wanted to mention. In the vicinity of this project, we do have the planned work for the development of High Point Pass south of Holy Hill Road on what is now that private driveway. And that's a project that's been approved for TID funding. And we'll also be extending utilities from Holy Hill Road to that main driveway entrance to Truck Country about halfway down what will become High Point Pass. That's also approved as part of that same project. And then related items that might come before you in the future, kind of regarding just development of this area in general, but also supporting Truck Country, are award of a construction contract for High Point Pass. Currently, R.A. Smith is doing the design on that. So when we're ready to construct, we'll have an item before you for construction of that road. And then we'll probably need an agreement with MLG, who's a neighboring property to the east, for acquiring an easement for the utilities to come through their property, and for acquiring a portion of their property for right-of-way for the road. But otherwise, the agreement is negotiated between the two groups and is mutually agreeable.
And this is information only then, is that correct?
This is approval.
Oh, it is,
Yep.
okay. And I will entertain a motion.
I'll move approval of the development agreement between the village and Truck Country.
Second.
Comments, questions? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. Division Road, conceptual design and a review of the public information meeting.
Yeah, so as you know, the village board approved a study on Division Road, which included public engagement. Part of that public engagement included 2 public information meetings that were held over the summer here. The first meeting, we had 28 people in attendance, or at least 28 people that had signed in. And in the second meeting in the boardroom, we had a few more with 55 people coming in to look at our plans. There were also 41 surveys that were completed online. So we have received a good amount of feedback. And essentially what residents were presented with were sort of 3 options, 3 general options for what we could do with Division Road. Kind of a low-end approach where it's, you know, maybe the cheapest project, it's the quickest project, but it won't last as long as some of the others. And that was kind of the mill and overlay option. There was then pulverize and reconstruct with some additional improvements for curb and gutter in select locations, path replacement in some locations, and other potential improvements for pedestrian safety and that sort of stuff could be included in that scope. And then there was a full reconstruction, which was presented, and that was, you know, essentially making Division Road look like Mequon Road or Pilgrim Road. And feedback came in pretty strongly for almost all the people that were in attendance to take that middle of the road approach. So given that, we're looking for the committee to have a conversation tonight about the 3 different approaches, and potentially make a recommendation to the village board on following one of these approaches. There's a few notes at the bottom of the agenda item that talk about kind of what that means for full reconstruction. That would include, you know, a cost for full design of the road, and we're estimating that the road life in that case would be 25 to 30 years, but the cost for replacement would be around 7.4 million. When you're getting into the lesser 2 options, or the middle and the low end option, the pulverize and reconstruct, we're estimating a 15 to 20 year life. And that is in the packet at 2.4 million. But that is also the option where there's kind of the most variables, where we could select different things to include or exclude. So that price could go up or it could come down a little bit. And then the cheapest option, mill and overlay, just a kind of a quick fix on the road. 5 to 10-year road life with a $1.5 million cost. Probably not a lot of design dollars in that. Yeah, 1.5. So those are the three choices we're kind of presenting. And then, depending on where this committee and the board falls when it comes to those three choices, we'll continue down and have additional design efforts next year if it's funded in the budget. So with that, I can take any questions or talk more about the public information meetings or information that was identified in the survey.
Question, Matt, doing half of the road for the second half later, like a year later. How did that come out in the?
Yeah, that's been our plan all along because we've been anticipating having to do something with the Old Farm lift station. So the way that we're presenting it in the budget doesn't necessarily reflect that. I talked to Administrator Krecklow, and he'd like to borrow for the full amount of the project, most likely. Yeah, depending on what we choose. But that the construction would have to line up well with the Old Farm upgrade, if it were to be in the same sequence. So, what we want to do is have that design study report that was talked about in the previous item for Old Farm Lift Station and figure out what our best approach is with the lift station, and then have that inform the Division Road project.
Looking for comments and sending this recommendation.
Yep, and any questions or comments, we can handle those.
So as a frequent user of the path, and obviously everybody drives on Division Road, does option 2 get the path away from the roadways in the areas where they abut one another, creating a safety issue?
It does as best it can to get the path away from the road. There's a few points where the right of way is narrower and it comes up to the intersections. So yeah, we're looking to make improvements, and that might mean, kind of extending the corners and rounding out the corners more to provide more space around where the path meets the crossings. But I would also say that whatever we've done so far is very preliminary and is not to the level of detail of like specific crossings.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Speaking for myself, I like the middle of the road option, but people they're living there. And it's also far less costly than bringing it into Mequon Road. I don't think anybody would want that. At least I don't want to see another Mequon Road coming into Germantown. But anyway, my opinion would be the second option for the price. And that's the total cost of 2.4, which would potentially be split over 2 years, correct? Although you'd want to get all the money up front.
Yeah, from what Administrator Krecklow advised, we'd ask for all the money up front to have the full funding for the project, but the work itself may be divided over those 2 years to accommodate for the Old Farm lift station.
We don't think the cost would increase over that second year.
I mean, it's possible, but we'd have to factor that in.
Okay.
And-
0.4 does that, I presume.
And then, well, the other thing with the ask for the middle of the road approach would probably be higher than 2.4 million, just to accommodate for, there's more variables in that approach, and there may be select locations where we add curb and gutter. There might be signals that we entertain for pedestrian crossing safety.
So that's not included in the 2.4, the selective curb and gutter?
That is, but to the level that it's included in there is yet to be determined. So
any of these numbers will probably not be exactly this. They're going to be a little higher.
yeah, they'll float around a little bit, but
Okay.
if we choose the middle of the road approach, like for example, it says selective work on paths. Well, the committee or the board may come back and say, you know what, it would be better if we just redid all the paths. That would change the number, but it would still probably be a middle of the road approach,
Mhm.
where it's not a full reconstruct, it's not a fully urbanized cross section. But instead of trying to save portions of the path, the decision might be made down the road to replace them all. And that's the kind of thing that could happen in other locations on the project.
Ready? Bob?
I don't know about roads. Couple of general questions. With all of these alternatives, are there any right-of-way impacts?
Potentially, on the, kind of on the bend right by Dottie Way, there's a section of, going around that corner on the west side where there is no connection from the path to the sidewalk. So we would potentially look at acquiring right of way in those locations to make a connection. That was actually one of the, I don't know, 2 or 3 top comments that were received in the public meetings was kind of the danger of pedestrians having to get onto the road over that curve, and then back onto the sidewalk. So making that improvement would be a recommendation of ours that would require additional right of way.
What you could tell with these typical sections, we're not getting into any physical structures, are we? That we'd have to relocate anybody?
No.
Okay, because that's a big timeline issue and
Yeah.
impact in that regard. Any soil borings out there or?
We don't have any now, but if we got into
Right.
design, that would certainly become part of the scope.
So without that knowledge, how can we be recommending a mill and overlay? I mean, my impression of that road is that that base is real bad. And I don't think the mill and overlay is a valid alternative to present to the public.
I don't either, and I think it was presented just to give the full spectrum of what's possible there. If you're asking us what our recommendation is, I think we would prefer something between the middle of the road and the fully, urban full reconstruction.
As long as they don't get locked in on this cheap route out. What's the posted speed going to be out there? Same?
Same.
Was that 35?
Is it?
35.
I drive it all the time.
I guess Kevin's indicating that there's a possibility the speed could be reduced.
There were a number.
Go the speed limit. Oh,
Good evening again. With respect to the question about the speed limit, there were a number of comments regarding speeding and safety. The posted speed is 35. At the curve, there's a sign for 30 miles an hour. Consideration of reducing the speed limit to 30 and 25 would be evaluated during the design process. Given the speeding around the corner, especially the business that's connected, and the pedestrian movements in that area, right at the curve.
yeah, it surprises some people in the winter. They don't expect that tight curve there. I drive that all the time too. Where I'm going with that question is some of the alternatives show bicycle paths on the road. And I don't care if it's posted 25 or 35, people are going to be doing at least 35. And you need a buffer between the vehicles and bicycles. They can't be on sharing the road. Therefore, my recommendation would be a multi-use trail of 10 feet at least. So the trail's wide enough so you could have pedestrian traffic and bike paths on that. It's just the speeds are just too high to put the bikes right on that road without any physical barrier or any kind of buffer, in my opinion.
I think that would be, if we were to draw a consensus out of what people felt about the bike lanes, that would probably match it pretty closely. And that's another example of how the middle of the road approach could grow from 2.4 to a little more. If you're entertaining widening the path, then you're probably replacing it and widening it over the whole length on the one side.
You wouldn't believe the battle I fought on Dodges Bay to get that path from the edge of the road just to create a buffer of grass. People fought us tooth and nails for that, just to gain just 3 feet from the edge of the road, which is nowhere enough. enough of a buffer. But we could see some of that too on this road. But those are my comments at this stage. There'll be more to follow. We doing a traffic study?
Traffic study was completed.
Okay. So we've got enough width, the current width. We don't have to add lanes.
Yeah, the study showed that like an additional lane is not necessary,
Okay.
even with projected growth in the village.
Any turn lanes at any of the intersections?
No, if anything, there was a recommendation on one intersection that we could remove a turn lane. Remember the intersection?
Yes, it was near the Hawthorne intersection, near Lilac as well, in that vicinity, where it widens out to 3 lanes. So that was the recommendation of the traffic engineer that completed the study with the consultant team.
Eliminate the turn lane, huh?
That was identified as an industry standard. Whether or not that moves forward in final design or preliminary design, I think keeping the general configuration would be evaluated.
What do you think
for-
is hurting by keeping it?
It's probably, I would guess based on feedback when we did talk about it at the meetings, that would be a pretty unpopular thing to do. And by and large, people's biggest concern with this project was the drivability of the road. There were plenty of comments about pedestrians and bikes, but I think by and large, people want a road that they can travel easily. So facilitating that with like keeping the turn lane, since it already exists, I don't think is, that seems like a logical approach.
Just to follow up on that, part of the consideration as well was the separation by compressing from 3 lanes to 2 lanes and creating that gap for the pedestrian path, particularly at Hawthorne.
That's,
Yes, so Hawthorne is identified as one of those other priority areas in addition to the pedestrian path between Wendy and Dottie, where that pedestrian path at Hawthorne is immediately adjacent
it is.
to
on
the road.
yeah.
And so we're looking at shifting it. There's some utilities there and there may be some storm sewer extension work that we would need to add in to fill in the ditch. So the path would be wider there, but that again would be evaluated further during the design
Yeah.
phase.
Yeah, I think for the purposes of tonight, we're just kind of looking for, which of these 3 approaches do you generally support? And we'd like to get the same out of the village board meeting. And then, we'll go down a path where there's preliminary design and can be additional discussions about particular features in the roadway.
Okay, so you don't care about the features tonight, just one of these 3 options. Okay, that simplifies it. Okay,
When I
Do we-
moved in the 90s, there was no problem. I live in Juniper Drive.
Uh-huh.
Getting on the road, no problem. Now it's a problem. So it's interesting to hear that right now, we don't think we need signals or anything, so.
The only signals that were considered were pedestrian safety, like beacons. And we are looking to make improvements to crosswalks. Yeah.
Okay.
we have a motion?
No, I'll move to recommend option 2, pulverize and reconstruct.
Is it all or nothing? Do we say some morph of middle of the road and a little higher or?
I think that's, if you choose option 2, then like I said, it can kind of scale up or scale down as we get into preliminary design.
They are drastically different, all 3 of them. So if we say middle of the road, that's something that the village board then can take and talk about the path being redone or whatever.
Okay.
So we have a motion. Do I have a second to that?
Yep.
Okay, Phil, and
Just a comment. I think that we were under the assumption that option 2 was going to be something that the residents wanted as well. And I'm glad to hear that after your listening sessions and that seems to be the middle of the road, the path that they want to go. Make some improvements to some of the paths that are there. And, I think it's a good option for now instead of curb and gutter all the way through.
I personally think too, that involvement was so important. I'm glad you did it so well during those sessions, because I would not want to relive the Donjas Bay debacle from what, over a decade ago now. That was very difficult because we didn't do that. So anyway, we have a motion and a second. Any more comments, discussion? We'll vote. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. Moving on to approval of grant application for agricultural road improvement program.
So this is a new road improvement program that's available through WISDOT for agricultural roads. There was a $50 million award in 2024, and now we're coming up on an application period for 100 million in 2025. And we are anticipating applying for assistance through the program for portions of Pleasant View and Rockfield roads. Those are some roads that are in very poor condition and in need of assistance. The good thing about this program is that it's a 90-10 cost share, so we'd only be responsible for 10% of the cost. Part of the application is that you itemize your costs and that sort of thing, but you also had to produce letters of support. So we did some outreach over the summer to get letters of support to quantify some of the agricultural business that's taking place on these roads. And those letters of support or forms, they're essentially forms that were completed, go with the application to WISDOT for consideration. The Kevin, I know you just walked back there, but the question was the letters of support, if you are familiar with the folks that submitted them.
There's a number of farmers that have provided their support with identifying their economic activity, the materials they're hauling, if their route would be impacted based on removing the road rating restriction and the seasonal weight restrictions. So far we've received 8 and anticipating a 9th based on discussions.
Did Old Germantown submit a letter for you?
I have not received that yet, no.
No, because that would be, I mean, that's economic, first of all. It's a really hot issue right now is to have the agricultural restaurant type of a thing. That's on Pleasant View. I would think that would be one I want to pursue. They
Yeah.
get a lot of traffic down there now.
It does have to be an agricultural producer.
But it is. They have farmland there. It's basically a farm that decided to have a restaurant.
Yeah, so
also.
staff has identified all the parcels adjacent to the right-of-way along Pleasant View from Freistadt to Bonnewell and along Rockfield Road from Division to Pleasant View, and transmitted correspondence with the farmer support application. And I'm pleased with the response so far. When I had contacted the USDA about if they had any of this information available, they were surprised that the state would be requesting some of this information from farmers. And that's been some of the conversations I've had with the farmers that have followed up and may or may not have submitted their applications with disclosing some of the economic activity, number of employees and things of that nature. There was a session that the state held, the DOT shared information about the spring $50 million opportunity and how there was over 125 applicants, I believe, and they awarded 24 projects for the 50 million, and our project amount fits within that range, and there were no projects awarded in Southeast region, so hopefully having a project application submitted for Germantown will help. But there is a very competitive application process. So there's no guarantee
Sure.
that it would happen.
Well, thank you for going through this. I think it's important to take advantage of these opportunities. And when anybody that's driven Rockfield Road in the past 5 years, I mean, can it get any worse? It's like a garden growing in all the cracks in the middle of summer. So I mean,
bet.
anybody who actually sees that road is like, you have to replace
Yeah.
that. Even it's even worse than Pleasant View. But, so hopefully
So-
we'll get lucky.
Yeah, so we're looking for support or approval of applying for this grant. Once we submit the application, we are tied into accepting it. If we get the award, it would be funded out of our road program because it is that we anticipate it being the 90-10 cost share. So that 10% that remains would come out of the regular, like annually approved road program funding.
Ready?
I'll make a motion to support the village staff in applying for the agricultural road improvement program for sections Pleasant View Road and Rockfield Road.
Second.
Further discussion?
Yeah, one question. Is this going to require a grant writer or is this going to come from staff?
This will be staff.
Okay.
There's
You
the
guys
grant
can
writer
handle
right-
it?
Mr. Driscoll is the grant writer.
Excellent.
Further questions? Vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. Award of the fall tree planting contract. Award the fall tree planting contract to Dan Larson Landscaping for an amount not to exceed $9,120.
So this was a budgeted amount for tree planting this year. We'd been holding off on this. Originally, we'd planned to do the work in the spring, but because of what transpired with trees and then the development and eventually approval of the comprehensive tree plan, we held off, but now we're looking to proceed. Fall is a good planting window that we'd like to take advantage of. So we're looking to plant trees on 30 vacant planting locations across the village. That does include some residential locations. So we'll be careful over the course of the contract to follow the guidelines that we set for ourselves in the comprehensive tree plan regarding communication. But I would say the majority of these planting locations are on thoroughfares. So they'd be, I guess, less prone to the same level of scrutiny as like the tree pruning was last fall. So you can see how the bid results came in there. We're requesting award of the contract to Dan Larson Landscaping for that amount not to exceed $9,120.
Committee? So it just says replacing 30 trees. Are those trees that died or they're gone?
Gone.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Phil.
How many trees have we lost in the last 12 months, please?
There have been a few, and typically how that works is when we're aware of a location, it gets added to the list of trees that are vacant or dead for eventual replacement, but it's kind of goes to the bottom of the list. I can think of an example of some trees in the Renwood development that didn't survive after initial planting, so they'd just been a couple of years old. That's probably the most typical way that things nowadays become vacant. How we got the big backlog of vacant trees previously was,
We all know.
Yeah, through-
Don't worry. Don't worry.
We don't need to go there.
Don't worry. So I guess, are we keeping even? Are we getting a little ahead? Are we falling behind, I guess, is kind of where I was going with the question.
I would say that if we can approve this and then we'll have subsequent requests in future years, so we have kind of a 5-year plan to get back up to full planting on the vacant sites, then at that point we would be maintaining pretty well. But it will be about a 5-year effort.
Maintaining at 300 vacant sites or maintaining?
No, maintaining at full planta, like planting 100% of the sites.
Thank you.
Bob?
So were all these contractors given copies of our comprehensive tree plan?
They were given a copy of the specification, which had reference to the comprehensive tree plan, and the actual provisions in the contract were related or tied back to what was in the plan. So Did they read the whole document? Not likely. But did they read the pertinent provisions of the specification that were drawn from the plan? Yes.
I think the only one who read the whole document was your personal gardener and arborist. Just looking at the bids. All right, thank you.
Further comments, motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the award of the tree planting contract to Dan Larson Landscaping for an amount not to exceed $9,120.
I'll second.
Further discussion? We'll vote. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Award of Public Works Engineering Division System Furniture Contract.
So this is the Public Works Engineering Division looking to improve upon our office space. As you know, the engineering division had been significantly understaffed for a number of years. And I think we have furniture that predated Village Hall, to be honest. And with the new staff, I feel that it's appropriate to anticipate that we'll continue to be full staffed and that we should be providing decent workspaces for the folks that are now working for us. So we worked with EBI, who has done furniture for the village in other locations, including the new DPW facility, to get a proposal for taking kind of our open office area, which currently has 3 workstations and some storage, and creating 4 workstations, and also adding some storage. EBI has a government contract, a state contract that we're able to piggyback off of. So it's a cooperative contract, and their pricing is very good compared to what we would get without use of that cooperative contract. So I think it's important to support the staff and make these upgrades. It would also create an opportunity for a swing space or a space for expansion should we add staff in the future, which I think is also important coming down the road here. So I recommend for approval of this contract. The funding, I would mention, comes from unspent capital accounts from 2021 for equipment upgrades that either didn't spend their full authority or were not utilized at that time and are not anticipated to be utilized. So those funds do need to be spent, and we're utilizing 2 of those accounts, and they're listed here.
Okay, committee? And we did mention it's $35,338, which I thought sounded pretty reasonable. Rick?
I'll move approval of the contract to Emmons Business Interiors for an amount not to exceed $35,338.11.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. That brings us to H, award of a 3-year building cleaning service contract to Vanguard Cleaning Systems for $562,752.
Be dirty.
So this is just our typical building cleaning contract. It's currently under contract with Clean Power, who's been doing that for a number of years. We have that contract set to expire on December 31st, and we're looking for services to continue beyond that. Scott and his group worked on proposals. Part of the RFP or bid that was done involved review of a task list associated with all the buildings, which representative members from those buildings had an opportunity to review and approve before it went out for bid. And that was the basis for coming up with these numbers. As you can see, if you're looking at just 1 year, Vanguard, it was at about 187. Clean Power, who's currently doing the work, was at 193, so it was relatively close. And over 5 years, we've got about a $35,000 difference or so. So We are seeking approval of the contract to Vanguard Cleaning Systems.
Now, we had Clean Power for a long time, didn't we? Or am I making that up?
I know it's changed over time. I think
Yeah.
they're the most recent contract, and is it a
Okay.
4 or 5 year? Okay.
I think it was bid for a while.
Yeah, it's good that we're bidding this out. I have no problem with that at all. And we are familiar, I guess, with Vanguard and they do a good job supposedly, right?
Yeah, well, and I think there's a desire among staff for a change as well. You know, these contracts are difficult to manage. And it just may be that Clean Power, you know, got into the contract here at a difficult time with all the inflation that's happened. It's been hard to pay and keep employees at the rates that were proposed so long ago. So I think they've been in a difficult situation and we've been in a difficult situation as well. And I think, you know, in
Yeah.
addition to them being the low bid, we're looking forward to the opportunity of working with a new business.
Getting things cleaned. So I can understand that. Do I have a motion?
Make a motion to award the cleaning contract for the next 3 years to Vanguard Cleaning Systems for the amount not to exceed $562,752.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. The next contract, award of 4-year contract for towel and mat service for a total of $49,206.
So this is very similar to the cleaning contract. We're looking for a 4-year contract. In this place, the services originally were set to expire on September 30th, but staff has arranged to have that carry through to the end of the year. So we'd be looking for this contract to begin January 1st. It's essentially continuing the same level of service that we have now. You can see the results of the bids. ITU AbsorbTech is current provider, and given the results of this bid, we're asking that we continue that relationship.
Committee?
I'll make a motion to award the contract to ITU AbsorbTech in the amount not to exceed $49,206.83 for the next 4 years.
I'll second.
Questions? Bob?
Help me with that math. $11,938.75 times 4. You don't get the 49,206. So somehow they threw some increase in there already.
With increase.
I just moved away from it. I'm sorry. Back there.
I saw that on the previous bids too. It's like,
Well, with ITU, they're not holding the 11,938 over the course of the 4 years. There are increases built into that. So that's the total with increases.
so they're already forecasting what the increases are going to be.
Correct.
Is that in their contract? Or
Yes, that's allowable.
why don't they just give you that and don't say with increases?
I think that's just how we chose to phrase the write-up. If you, yeah, if you look at the 49, that's the number over the 4 years. The 11,938 is just the first year. Right.
Any more questions? We'll vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? It's unanimous. And that brings us to the director's report. Anything that you want to highlight?
Yeah, just a few things. I'll walk everybody through here. And tried to highlight them green on the director's report and don't want to take up too much time, but I wanted to mention that Maple Road is now under reconstruction. The closure started on Monday, or not Monday. Monday was Labor Day, Tuesday. And we're expecting that to be about 3 weeks or so in duration, give or take based on weather and other variables. But it's a pulverize and reconstruct of Maple Road from Appleton Avenue to the I-43 bridge. Sorry, 41, you're right. That'd be interesting. We are also kind of in the heart of our road program. That work began on School Road and now is moving throughout Glenwood Park and Willow Heights or Willow Creek Heights. So the bulk of the road program repaving will be taking place this month. In full transparency, there were some issues in coordination with School Road and the start of school. And that's definitely something that we were trying desperately to avoid. But the way things worked out with previously approved projects and the schedule for utility work and prioritizing getting the utility work in before the road, that's how we found ourselves in that situation this year. I don't anticipate things will happen like that in the future. We certainly have heightened awareness for what's happening to schools and to businesses. The good news is that the road was graded out. It is passable. Buses have been traveling on the road, even though it doesn't have an asphalt surface right now. And we are trying to coordinate that work so it doesn't impact school and arrival and departure times. We've also more or less completed at this point the 2024 seal coating program. That included sections of roads that were given the 3 different levels of treatment. There's the GSB 88, there's the micro surface, and there's the chip seal. I think the chip seal roads were done first, and then micro surface. You'll probably notice that most on River Lane. The chip seal was on a section of Holy Hill and Lilac, and then the GSB 88 roads.
How'd that go? Any complaints from residents driving on their driveways with fresh tar?
None of those complaints, but we did look into a complaint that was raised about River Road and how the micro surface kind of came together. They apply it in 8 or 10 foot, well, it's probably 8 foot or whatever comes out of the back of the truck. And where the road really widens out right by Mequon, that's sort of where they had to do 3 different lengths, and kind of right in the middle, there's a section there that probably has some excess material. So we're looking at how we can address that. But aside from that, no complaints or comments about tracking or access to driveways or anything like that.
Good.
All right, moving down. Last week, we met with A&R Pipeline. As we've talked about a couple times previously at the committee, there's this big pipeline project that's going to be coming through the village starting next spring. We'll probably bring an item before the committee in like December or January just to give a full update on what we can expect out of that project. We do have to permit the project for temporary driveways and right-of-way permits and that sort of thing. But the work itself is completely done by A&R. But it will be a project that folks see. It does cross our roads and utilities in a couple of different locations. So it'll be a high impact project in the village next spring and summer.
Will this be open trench?
I don't know the exact technique. That'll be part of our presentation. I think for whenever they're going under a road,
Yeah.
no.
The push.
Yeah. But in open areas, it's possible. And that will include that type of detail when we do that kind of,
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
want to get an idea on how much disruption there's going to be.
yeah, I will say the gentleman that presented to us really emphasized their desire to restore it to a condition where you wouldn't even know that they'd been there. So they seem to pride themselves on their restoration efforts. I hope that's true for our sake. But I guess that's worth noting. All right, moving on just into the department updates section. You can see Linda isn't here tonight. Linda resigned last week. It was a relatively quick resignation, so we did get a recruitment underway, and I actually do have an accepted offer on the position. So we're expecting somebody to start actually this coming Monday. which is good news for us. Related to Linda not being around, it's been more of a challenge handling citizen complaints and calls and that sort of thing. So when you look at the call log, it's or the complaint log, it's fairly incomplete. Because what we're relying on is calls getting routed to other folks in Village Hall or people leaving voicemails. And that doesn't always happen. But I think all of us can attest that we're getting some calls that we didn't normally get when somebody was sitting in that chair.
How long was she with us?
Just like 3 months.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
And it was an exit interview, not that I want to get into personal things, but I presume Steve did exit interview and everything with her for reasons and,
I don't know if Steve did. I did, because I just wanted to get feedback on,
Mhm.
what transpired. What she expressed was she had an opportunity outside of the village to pursue kind of a change in her career, and that's what she decided to do.
okay,
Um,
moving on.
all right, yeah, moving on. We're just working on a permit processing policy. You might remember we did a complaint processing policy going back a couple months. I think something similar is needed for permits in Public Works. We had 4 or 5 different permits, and now with the comprehensive tree plan and the right-of-way tree permit, we have another one. So I think it makes sense to just take a look at that and have a process for staff to follow with expectations on that. So when we complete that, I'll bring it here just for a quick look and review. There are some updates to the website. I took a look at it because I wanted to post the comprehensive tree plan on the website and really couldn't find a good location for it, just based on how it was organized. So I'm doing some work with Aaron on a better way to organize the Department of Public Works pages and
Good.
having a place where plans like that can reside and people can view if they wish. So just something for you to be aware of. And the last couple items relate to the DPW facility and the move. As of right now, we're still anticipating that we'll begin operating out of the new facility starting on Monday of next week. Few items to resolve were the security system and the network. And we're working through those. I think we're making good progress now. And along with that, you folks should be receiving an invite to the ribbon cutting event, which is mentioned on here. And then later for residents, there'll be an open house. That is tentatively scheduled for October 26th. That'll be a chance to walk through the facility, see some of the trucks. It's possible that police and fire will have some representatives there as well at that open house. So it'll be kind of a nice event. But yeah, things are very close there and staff are still working pretty hard on the move. I walked around the existing Public Works location this morning and the main building, and the first 2 garages are fairly empty. There's some additional items in some of the other garages that'll take more time, but the urgency isn't the same to get out of those because those aren't being demolished, but the building itself and the first couple of garages will be now this fall.
Did you throw a lot of stuff out?
Yes. Yes.
I bet.
Okay. Is
That's
that,
all I have for the
that's it?
report.
No, that's enough. That's good. Thank you for that. Any questions on anything Matt said?
Just a quick question on Lannon and Maple Road intersection. Is that essentially done now?
It's nearing completion, but the signal work still needs to
Oh,
be
okay.
completed.
I wasn't sure if they were gonna do the wire mounts like they did at Mequon and Country Air, or if they were going to put the big hurricane poles in.
It'll have the bigger, heavier duty poles. So that work remains, but the changes to the road configuration are essentially complete.
Okay, well, with that, let's take a look at when we can meet again. Our normal meeting date would be Wednesday, the 2nd. I can't make Wednesday either. Can you make Tuesday? The 1st? Okay, so it'll be Tuesday, the 1st at 5:30 PM in this room. Okay, and none of us have any announcements, I presume, so we will adjourn at 7:05 PM. Thank you, everyone.
Fully moved in. Yes. Yeah, take care.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's, What? Sort of getting the tire bank about home using. You could focus now home into the big walls on the road. There's one that's right in front of the speedway, right? Yeah, I just seen it. I just saw it in there. People see it.
But.
And that's all I have. You too. Happy going. You what? No. Yeah, a little harder to the ball. That's the game.
Everybody.
We'll see you. Thank you. It's really, just the ordinance change. Something else. So, no. But anyway, that come on the third. Yeah. That was probably 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes. So no, it was quick. It was a fast meeting, but not as fast as you would have hoped. It should have been probably 20 minutes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just moving things on the agenda.
Couldn't make that.
Blame everybody on the federal government again.
You people.
Yes.
Just.
That's what we do, spend your money. That's our job.
Hey, you can talk back, not that I'm over to. She told him he's gonna start following the local. She wrote, because it all Phillips bills. But it's gonna be like taxpayer to be multiple. I think that was the title.
Those go.
Ah,
Speaking of that, the assessments are out as of today.
Yeah.
The assessments are out, so get ready for that.
All right, we'll see you. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too. She said it before.
Oh, well, Rick, one last thing. I met with Aaron. Yeah, and you're the only person that hasn't, so I probably passed it on to you. No, it wasn't for me. It really wasn't. I sat down with them.
in more ways we can tell people.
I was supposed to be 30 minutes, and it was there for over an hour. And we really had a good conversation, not me. And I told him what I thought, it's the first time I ever saw it. That he has pretty much. He's one of his brothers, yeah. You know, by the cul-de-sac where they want to develop all that multi.
Want to do their own little village.
Oh, yeah, all right, yeah. You met with him. Said, you know who else met with? We've all met with him. We've all. What's the only one? Oh, really? I did. Asked me to meet with him, you know, but he was a good.
Zero years.
Yeah. Yeah, but he has a right to develop this. And he has a right to have. And he has a right to have that house taken before the board. And